Welcome everybody once again to our Lab of the Month series. Today we're going to be talking about the earthworm action potentials. I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques for using this prep in your courses. We'll talk about both lab tutor and lab chart applications here. And today I think we're going to go ahead and start with the lab tutor version. So I will switch over software here. And we'll bring up our lab tutor login. So this is what your students see when they come to class, and the first time they log in, they will pick their own password. So I've already got a student account set up here. And this will take me directly to my Lab of the Month. These are for those of you that aren't maybe familiar with the Lab Tutor teaching suite. It is a server-based software platform that allows you to set up multiple courses. And so these are all the different courses that we have set up here on our training server. And then I've added the specific exercises that I want students to have available to them. So here's our earthworm action potential exercise. So when I select this, I will be taken to the welcome page for the exercise. You'll see this little green pop-up sort of flash. That's the Lab Tutor kernel running in the background, and it's going to be communicating with the Power Lab and providing all of our acquisition elements for us. The only interface that students ever actually see for Lab Tutor is Internet Explorer. So we have taken the very best of our data acquisition elements, and we've hidden them all behind this very student-friendly interface. And when we combine this with Lab Tutor Online, students now have a digital laboratory manual that's accessible to them from any web-enabled device at any time, anywhere in the world. So it's a fantastic tool if you want to, in fact, get rid of the paper in your laboratory. So right now we're in preview mode. You see this blue bar across the top. This is going to allow me to go ahead and look through the exercises that I'll be doing today. So here's the setup. Here's what the worm will look like when it's pinned out. And then I have actually enabled here some of the example data. Now you can turn this off in the administrator side of the Lab Tutor teaching suite. So if you don't want your students to have any preconceived notions what the data will actually look like before they come to class, you want them to have that pure inquiry experience, you can turn this off so they won't actually see the example data. But here we've left the example data on. Of course, here we're looking for threshold, etc. And then they progress through the exercise just like they're turning the pages in their laboratory manual, only now we have the interactive help with things like the stimulator panel pop up here if they need additional guidance on how to operate these devices. They're all linked to this blue hyperlink text here. So this is what it looks like in preview mode. I'm going to go ahead and start the experiment here, and of course it's going to give me a little message that says, okay, you're ready to actually go ahead and collect some data, so we'll click OK, and this will take me back to the first page, and you'll see that that blue header bar is gone. I can now proceed through the exercise. So if I was a student coming into the laboratory, I would make sure that all of my cables were connected and that my earthworm was anesthetized and pinned out to the cork board. And the traditional method for this exercise is actually to record the action potentials transdermally using some chlorided silver wire, and we've included that picture here. And this connects to the little alligator clips that go into the bioamplifier cable, and lots of folks still use this. It's can be a little bit problematic, particularly for students. So I'm going to show you a little variation that we use now. So let me bring over my live camera shot here, and you can see this is the way I've set up my earthworm today. Let me see if we can make that a little bigger for you. So instead of using the chlorided silver wires, I'm actually using our MLA 1203 needle electrodes. These needle electrodes replace the clips and the silver wires seen here. We're already using pins to hold the earthworm down to the board, as well as to connect the stimulating electrodes down here. So these plug very neatly into the yoke of the bioamplifier cable. I'm going to try to show you that here. And we just place that on the side that has the label on it. Right, there's 2 pins for each connection on the bioamp cable. The side with the sticker is the side you want to connect these needle electrodes to. And then we just gently place these through the worm. You don't want to aim directly for the nerve cords here. You want to just get them in the tissue of the worm. You want to try to avoid damaging that nerve cord. That can cause issues. So that's what the worm prep looks like. Let me go back here to Lab Tutor. And we will take a look now at the actual exercise here. And what we're going to try to do is look at an evoked potential. We're going to begin stimulating and try to determine threshold here for the giant fiber. So here's the first recording, and you'll see that I'm in an exceptionally noisy environment here in our classroom in Colorado Springs. So I've got this terrible 60 cycle interference here, and this is a relatively common problem. Fortunately, this prep is usually robust enough that we can still get usable signal even with this electrical noise. If I had the facilities here to do a little more grounding and a little more shielding, we could clean this up significantly. So I'm going to go ahead and be a bad student, and we're going to jump ahead instead of going through incrementally here. And see if we can find the threshold here for the giant fiber. You'll see my stimulus artifact increases as I increase the stimulation voltage. And you'll see this is noted for us here on our stimulus channel. All right, so there we go. So I'm now up to 0.7 volts, and you'll see this little hump here that's actually sitting on top of that 60 cycle noise that's riding in the background. This is the action potential. This is what we're actually looking for. So now to confirm that that is threshold, I'm going to go ahead and drop down a little bit. We're back to 0.6 volts. We'll click start. You'll see that that big 60 cycle wave now, the phase has shifted a little bit. That is in fact room noise. My action potential is still right here. So let me drop down a little bit more. Let's see if we can get that to go away. And there, 0.5 volts, still a little sign of it. Drop down to 0.4 volts, and there it goes away. So as your students progress through this, they're going to see this threshold shift a little bit as we are pinging away on this worm, shooting half a volt through it roughly every time. The nervous system of the worm is going to have some response to this, right? So we're going to see this threshold shift a little bit. Sometimes, particularly if students are clicking away very quickly, we'll see this adapt a little bit, and that threshold will creep up. As they slow down, they will see that threshold begin to drop back down to the initial baseline. And this is pretty common behavior for this particular prep. So my initial threshold was right around half a volt. Let's run that back up to half a volt and see what happens, and you'll see there my signal comes back. So if we'd like to sort of get rid of this busy overlay in the background, remember with Lab Tutor we can right-click on these individual sweeps, these scope pages here, and we can overlay none of the records, right? So this will just show me the one that I have selected. So now I can go back here to 7. You can see there is my action potential. So we now then, the students proceed into the analysis phase. They fill in the notes. They can measure the latency here from the onset of the stimulus till the peak of the actual action potential that they see here. And we'll then move into exercise 2, where we will try to recruit the lateral giant fibers. Now these generally have a substantially higher threshold than the median giant. This is not always the case. Sometimes these will in fact have a very, very similar threshold, and it may be hard to distinguish the two. So we're going to go ahead and try this. We started at about half a volt for the median, and there's that response again, about the same time that we saw in the previous exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and run this up to 2 volts, and let's see if we can get the laterals to come in. Go ahead and turn off that overlay. This may be easier to see. There's our original response. We may have another response sort of running off the edge there. Let's go up to 2.5 volts, and let's just see. There you'll see our shifting background noise, but again we have that same response right around 15 milliseconds. With the position of the pins in this particular worm, we may in fact be missing it. We may have a response that's out here somewhere. I'm going to try 3 volts here and just see if I can find a second peak for these laterals. Hard to tell. Usually if we go to 4 volts, if we're not seeing a response, we're probably not going to see a response. Sometimes you just don't get the lateral fibers to fire, and unfortunately that does happen occasionally. So again, here we're getting some exaggerated room noise. This is really not a room for doing electrophysiology, but again, you can see we still do have that same repeatable action potential for the median, and we may not see laterals here. Just to confirm that we don't have a response that's out here past our 25 milliseconds, I'm going to go ahead and move the recording electrodes here a little bit closer to the source of the stimulus here. So we'll see if this helps us or hurts us. As a rule, once you get good signal, we would recommend against you actually moving the recording electrodes till your students have completed all of the exercises that they can. So now that those are relocated, I'm going to go ahead and put just a little more saline on this prep. We don't want them to dry out, so this is just a little bit of earthworm ringers with some ethanol in it. About 10 to 15% ethanol is usually plenty to keep them anesthetized without diminishing the integrity of the nervous system. we find that these preps can last well over 2 hours. This one's going on an hour for me already. So now that I've moved those recording electrodes closer to the source of the stimulus, we're going to expect to see a time shift here in that response that we're seeing from the median here. So let's see if that happens for us. I'll click start and you'll see that that's moved back now to about 12 milliseconds. And I'm afraid we're just not going to see the lateral fibers from this particular earthworm, and sometimes that happens. With LabTutor, however, we always include example data, and this is password protected, and we can go ahead and add that data. So here's data from a different prep that shows both an excellent median response and then a lateral response with a slightly longer latency. So again, this is from a different worm at a different time, recorded at a different temperature with a different electrode configuration. So it's really not meaningful to compare this data to the previous data that we're recording today, but it is a useful data set for students to complete the analysis if they can't actually record their own, right? So here's data we collected today. You'll see that it looks significantly different. We do have a much longer latency with this worm and this prep, and this is going to be some individual variation that you'll see depending on the species of the worm, how lively the worms are. If you have nice fresh night crawlers, usually you will get a better response than ones that have been hanging around in the fridge for a month. So all of these factors come into play when we use live animal models. So the rest of the LabTutor exercise is very straightforward. They will do an exercise here to look at conduction velocity. Now, we just moved those electrodes. You see how we did that? I can now compare the distance between the first recording and the second recording at two different positions now, and measure the actual conduction velocity. We then have the refractory period. This is where we will change the interval between paired stimuli, and we will look and see exactly just how fast those fibers can reset and fire a second action potential when a second stimulus is provided. And then the bidirectionality exercise. This is good to show students that the nerves actually conduct in both directions. So all we're going to do is just swap the position of the stimulation leads to the opposite end of the worm, and we'll record in the same fashion to demonstrate that nerves in fact go both ways. The last page of any LabTutor exercise is always the report, and the report page here will contain all of the tables and graphs as well as any question boxes where students have typed in their observations, and this page is always formatted for printing. So if you like your students to turn in a printed version of the laboratory report, we have a print option that you can enable here. This will send these pages to your local printer. We also have an email option. This will convert this page into a PDF document that they can then email to themselves, to an email that you designate, or any email address that they enter. The submit button will actually flag this submission on your LabTutor server. This will tell you that the student is done with it and they have completed their report. This will allow students to go back and to review the work that they have done, but they will not be able to make any further changes to the laboratory report once they click submit. This can also simultaneously email a report to a blind email address that you set up in the background that students never need to know. So if someone's responsible for marking the exercise, they can just get the email PDF and off they go. So those are your 3 report options in LabTutor. So we know now that this is a great tool for introducing a little bit of neurophysiology to some of your introductory classes, and a lot of folks that use LabTutor will like this because worms are cheap, they're very easy to get, and because they're invertebrates, oftentimes you don't even need an IACUC to use invertebrates at many universities around the country. So worms are a great model. We can demonstrate some basic physiology here using the LabTutor platform. So now many of you teach upper division courses, and you may in fact want your students to be able to know a little bit more about data acquisition and instrumentation and digital filters and things like this. So for those sorts of courses, we'll switch over here to LabChart, which is our flagship research grade software. And so here we have LabChart. It's going to find my Power Lab, and we'll click OK. LabChart is still a very powerful teaching tool, but so many of the features were so above and beyond what many of our customers needed. We developed LabTutor for the introductory level courses, but if you're going to be teaching upper division, you're going to be teaching a research course where students need much more flexibility in the acquisition interface, then LabChart is certainly the tool for this. Now, all of our exercises we've developed for LabChart, of course, are available for download from adinstruments.com. You can download these, and all you need to do is double-click on the LabChart package file, and it will immediately install the experiments into the LabChart Welcome Center if you're using LabChart for Windows. We do offer virtually all of these for our Macintosh customers. The installation process is just slightly different, but there are Macintosh versions of this Earthworm action potential as well. So each one of our exercises always comes with a laboratory report. Now, this is a pre-formatted Word document that you can use, give students the study questions as well as spots to copy and paste screenshots of their data files into the document itself. It's a Microsoft Word document, so it is completely editable, and those are available for you to use if you like. We always include example data with LabChart as well, so here's several different sample data files that you can look at. Settings file is what's going to set up the actual acquisition parameters, and will be the sort of the head start that your students need to kind of get them in the ballpark for recording data from this Earthworm. And then, of course, the student protocol. This is a Microsoft Word document, and this takes them through step by step. So just like the LabTutor protocol, where they were doing everything in the HTML environment, this is provided again as a Word document so that you can edit this so that it better fits your curricula. So here we see the Earthworm anatomy, here we see the setup, here's the explanation for the actual waveform, right? We're recording using the differential electrodes here, so that's why you see the upward phase, and then the downward phase as the action potential passes by your 2 recording leads. We take them through the equipment setup, just like they saw in LabTutor, and then threshold, and again we provide some screenshots here so that they can see what the different elements will look like when they're actually recording. I'm going to scroll ahead here to the actual data notebook. So this is the last few pages of the student protocol. This is where they'll actually fill in the tables. Old school analog style, right? So they would print this off, bring it to class with them, and fill in the tables as they go, along with some study questions here. So again, this can all be downloaded from our website and is customizable to meet your needs. So let me show you what this experiment looks like. In LabChart, we'll go ahead and launch our settings file here as soon as Windows gets caught up. So when we launch the Earthworm action potential settings, here's our recording screen. We'll be recording here in the scope window in LabChart for Windows here, and we will need to bring up our stimulator panel. So the stimulator panel here can float just like we saw in LabTutor, and I can enter my pulse height, make sure my stimulator is turned on, and now when I click start, we'll see our stimulus marker here. This time it's shown on the top channel. Here's our stimulus artifact. On our recording channel, remember when we're using LabChart, the bioamplifiers will always show up on channels 3 and 4. We've actually hidden channel 1 here. It's compressed up against the top of the screen, and we're using channel 2 as our stimulus marker here. So just a little bit different than what we saw in LabTutor. I can go ahead and I can auto scale that. You'll see there's our same 60 cycle noise. Now we'll increase this a little bit and see if we can find threshold again. And there's our response. Let's see if that's repeatable. Oh, maybe not. When we see a big dip, right, a big offset here, probably because we're pinging away a little too quickly. When this happens and you see a big offset at the start of the recording, have your students slow down a little bit. I get impatient as the next guy. We start clicking away and we end up with these large offsets that can significantly obscure the signal. That, and I think my Earthworm here is just about given his all. So let's see one more time here. We can get a response. Maybe. Hard to tell with these little high frequency elements stuck in my noisy room here. Drop it back down. Tough. But this worm's getting a little old. So that's the general procedure. And of course, one other element I forgot to show you back here in the Welcome Center. Let me bring up the Welcome Center here again for you. The folders here contain all of the information that the students will need, but we also need some instructors' materials, and we've put that in a hidden folder. So if you'd like to find the instructors' materials here in the LabChart Welcome Gallery, we can go ahead and show the folder in Explorer. So this will open up the Windows Explorer and will allow us to navigate back to the parent folder here, and you'll see that here is our instructors reference folder, and that does not show up in the experiments gallery. But in the instructors reference, this will have some very valuable information for you. This will take you through the protocol step by step. It will give you the experiment alternatives, including using the needle electrodes like we are today. We also talk about using some other accessory equipment like the amplifiers that are included with our Neurophysiology teaching suite. These are made by AM Systems, and I'm going to show you an example of that here in just a second. So we do have some additional materials here for more advanced studies if you're interested in that. Here's a recipe for the Earthworm saline, as well as how to chloride silver wires if you're using that particular version of the prep. So again, our instructor's reference is here. It will talk about all of the different things that you can do here in LabChart to actually get around some of these issues. So here's another one that may be useful to you. We can actually use the scope averaging feature. If we do have a lot of this background noise, we can set up the sampling to actually run multiple sweeps every time the students click start, and we can then average that signal. So here what we're seeing is the average of 10 individual sweeps, and you'll see that this has actually removed a considerable amount of that background noise. Now we have the same capabilities to do this in LabTutor, we just don't have the ability for students to do this on the fly. This would need to be set up using LabAuthor in the background to actually have a scope average. So if you know that you have a particular noise condition in your environment, and we can test this using LabAuthor and setting up a scope averaging protocol in there that works around your particular noisy environment. This may be something that you would want to customize in your LabTutor setup and then implement for your particular course. So again, this sort of little pro tips, these are included in the instructor's materials. To get to the instructor's materials for the LabTutor version of our experiment, of course you log in to your LabTutor server, and with your administrator's credentials, click on the Experiments tab and then select the instructor's materials from the actual server. So anybody with an admin account on your server can access LabTutor instructor's materials. So this is all good stuff provided to you with our content, and of course we never charge our customers for any of this. This is always available to you once you're a Power Lab education customer. So I want to close out of a couple of windows here, and I want to show you sort of the next evolution of this Earthworm experiment. Let's see. Okay, I need Internet Explorer. Here we go. This link is a link to a customer of ours, Robin Cooper, at the University of Kentucky, and he has done quite a bit of work with invertebrates, and he's been nice enough to post all of his protocols on his laboratory website, as well as YouTube videos of students actually performing these exercises. And this is all available on the web and available to you. Robin is a fantastic educator and a longtime user of 80 Instruments products. And this is all available to you via his website. So here's his version of the Earthworm experiment. And we can bring up this little YouTube video. It's about 12 minutes or so long, and you're not going to be able to hear the audio because of the WebEx thing, but these links are available on that forum post for the LabChart educators. And we do have links that take you to the lab links. He has cockroach experiments and crayfish experiments and all sorts of other invertebrate preps that he's used, and he has filmed many of his students actually performing these exercises. And with his particular setup, he's using a much more advanced neurophysiology rig with the AM systems amplifier and a suction electrode, and is actually attaching to the nerve directly and then stimulating. This particular prep will also allow you to look at the ionic bases of action potentials, because the worm is fully dissected out. You can change salines, look at the effect of sodium, the effect of potassium, etc., on the actual action potentials in these fibers. So I'd like to thank Dr. Cooper and his lab for making all of these available to the scientific community. And again, this link is available through the 80 Instruments software forum. So take advantage of these other resources that our customers have developed, because we know you guys know a lot more about this, and we'll find new and more interesting ways to use our hardware and software than we will ever think up. And we're very, very happy to promote your efforts and to help you share your information with your colleagues. So lots of other additional things we can use the Earthworm model for, and I would encourage you all to give this particular model a try. It's relatively robust. It's an easy one for students to approach, and is a very, very useful tool for adding a little bit of neurophysiology, electrophysiology to really any of your laboratory courses. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for joining me today for our Lab of the Month series, and hopefully we'll see you at a future presentation.